Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. It's a pleasure to welcome Professor Dante Donati, esteemed faculty member in the marketing division at Columbia Business School, as our distinguished guest on today's episode. His research spans a range of empirical topics in marketing and economics with a focus on the impact of information and communication technologies on economic, political, and social outcomes. Dr. Donati also works on methodologies for conducting surveys and experiments on social media and leads large-scale randomized evaluations on social and behavioral change communication campaigns. Dr. Donati has collaborated with global institutions such as the World Bank, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and various non-profit organizations. He is also the co-creator of Virtual Lab, an open source platform for online surveys and social media campaign evaluation. Dr. Donati holds an MSc in Economics with great distinction from Bocconi University and PhD in Economics, Finance and Business, also with great distinction from Pompeu Fabra University. In this episode, Dr. Dante Donati offers valuable insights from his latest research, the cost of banning TikTok, implications for digital advertising. So without further delay, let's welcome Dr. Dante Donati to the episode. Dr. Dante, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Deepak.
Professor Dante, can you walk us through the core motivation behind this research? What made the TikTok outrage in January 2025 an ideal natural experiment to study advertising market dynamics?
All right. Again, thank you for having me here talking about this new piece of research, which is co-authored with my colleague here at the business school, Hortense Fong. Let me start by saying that in the US, even more broadly, but we focus on the US specifically, the digital advertising market is particularly concentrated. Think that platforms like Google and Meta alone, they already cover 50% of the market. Okay, and so a ban on an app or let's say digital advertising platform like TikTok would further increase concentration in this market, right? And so the question there was for us was if that ban went into effect, what would be the consequences for advertisers' budget reallocation and also on the prices for advertising, right? And so we thought, look, there's going to be a ban, but what we weren't expecting is that TikTok was actually on purpose going dark the day before the ban was into effect, was going into, what was going to be into effect. And so what happened was on January 18, right? TikTok suspended its operations and went dark in the US only. Um, that was unexpected. It was the day before the ban. And that lasted about 14 to 15 hours. So it went actually over the next day. So the Sunday, in practice, TikTok wasn't accessible to users in the US. And then, given that the ban was delayed, after that the ban was delayed, the platform restored its operations. So the fact that this outage, that's how we call it here, right, happened all in the US and for a very specific, even short amount of time, it provides a very good opportunity to conduct a natural experiment. Why? Because we can basically compare what happens to the US market, digital advertising market, with what happens to ads in other markets, so outside of the US, before and after, right? Before and during the outage. And so we said, do we have the data? Well, maybe we can collect data, and then if we can collect the data, we can try to see what is what is happening in the market, thanks to this specific natural experiment opportunity.
You found a 10% increase in CPM on Meta platforms. How does this compare to typical day-to-day or month-to-month variations in ad prices?
All right. This is an important question because we want to understand what is the economic impact, right, of this increase. First, let me say, that 10%, just to put a dollar amount, we also estimate a precise, an absolute increase, which ranges between $1 to $2. Okay, so with an average of 1.5 in our data. Okay, so in our data, the impact is between, you can think of $1 to $2. Okay, on daily cost per mil, okay, cost per thousand impressions. So our data, maybe we'll discuss later, is a bit, is specific because of data availability. We could only cover some ads. But if we look at average benchmarks from a variety of campaigns in the US, you can see that day-to-day variations are around the mean of 9.5 dollars for CPM, and they are around one plus minus $1 around this mean. Okay, so the standard deviation in statistical terms is about $1. So what we estimate, the 10% increase basically corresponds to $1 increase, which is around one standard deviation increase, right? With respect to these day-to-day variations that we see in the market.
Professor, the study mentions opposing forces at play, increasing demand from advertisers and increasing supply of impressions from users switching platforms. How did you isolate this effect in your analysis?
Um, all right, so this has to deal with the platform, right? With the market and how the market operates and what is the role of the marketplace in this case, right? So platforms like Meta, TikTok, right? They are marketplaces for users to basically provide opportunities for advertisers to show ads, right? Um, so we have a platform that takes as an input the attentions of users. Okay. And based on that, they decide how many ads they want to show, right? They want how many ad slots they want to provide to advertisers to buy, right? And so demand comes from advertisers that they basically choose the budget, they make up the ads, and then the ads compete in auctions to basically populate the ad slots, right? So the demand comes from the ads, the supply comes from users and platforms, joint decisions, basically. So what we observe in the data is impressions. So the number of impressions, the number of times the ads were on the screens of the users. And we also observe spend, so the budget. Okay. What we do not observe is the actual ad slots or also so-called ad loads of the platform. Okay, so we cannot say anything about what is the platform doing on the background, but we can see how many people or how many times the advertisers can reach users. So this allows us at least to separate, effects on ad or I would say demand, so the ad spend, the demand, and the, aggregate supply of impressions. What do we find? We find that basically, the CPM, the price per impression, is the ratio between spend and impressions. Okay, so we saw that there is an increase in CPM, and that mainly comes from the fact that the numerator, which is the spend, increase more or quicker than the increase in impressions. So we see a strong and statistically significant increase in the spend for advertisers, so in the demand of ads. We do not see a statistically significant increase in impressions. So we find that there is a marginal increase, which is not statistically significant. That is probably due to the fact that, of course, there are users that switch from TikTok to Meta on that day, and we actually see that in the data. But the fact that it's the platform that chooses the amount of ads to show, right? That probably puts a cap on the total number of impressions that you can reach. So to some extent, what I want to say is that the supply it suffers from some capacity constraints, while the demand, the advertisers were, competing to buy that supply, right? To competing to buy those impressions. And therefore, we see that overall the price actually went up on that day.
Dr. Donati, what type of advertisers by size or sector shifted their ad spend the most after TikTok went offline? And what does that tell us about platform substitutability?
All right, so this is a very important question that we try to unpack in the paper. And the way we do so is we use um, budget in the previous, or ad spend in the previous 2 months to proxy for vendors for advertiser size, and that is commonly done in the literature. So what do we find? If we look at size, we find that the advertisers that are larger, so larger budgets, they increase spend approximately 3 times more compared to those who are to advertisers that are smaller, or they have smaller budgets. So this tells us first that meta platforms are probably better substitutes for larger advertisers than for smaller ones, right? So that is a very important piece of information when we want to think about who are the advertisers that actually might have, a substitution, as a substitute, a valuable substitute in the market in case, TikTok were banned. We also find that so we got extra data. So we try to match advertisers that are on Meta with data from TikTok, and so we could try to identify with a fuzzy matching what are the advertisers that were also on TikTok before the ban. And if we look at that subset, we found actually what we found was that those advertisers that were on TikTok before the ban, they increased spend 1.5 times more compared to the average increase that we find. Okay, so basically, what even in this case, we find support for direct demand substitution from TikTok to Meta, right? For those advertisers that were already on both platforms. Okay. And so this basically provides evidence on the fact that these two platforms compete in the same markets, at least for some advertisers, right? And then there are smaller advertisers that might actually lack some options. And we can talk more about this later.
Professor, you relied on data from the Meta Ad Library,
Yeah.
specifically for social issues and political ads. How representative do you think these findings are for the broader digital advertising market?
So this is a key question, of course. So unfortunately, right, we have to use data that is available. We didn't get any data that is not available online from the Meta platform. So, the good thing is that this research is reproducible. Now, the downside is that this data set is only part of a very, actually is a very small portion of the total ads that are present online, right? So we estimate that these in terms of spend, our data captures around 2% of the total annual spend on the platform. Okay, so it's a very tiny fraction. But there is a good thing, there is an important thing to mention, right? That the ads, right, the meta ads from any advertisers. They compete in auctions, right? And they compete broadly, what we can think of, they compete in the same auctions, right? And the system, the auction system, the mechanisms are similar for our ads and for the ads, overall, the broader set of ads. So that actually helps us make some claims that what we observe is likely to happen also outside of our data set. We also do a bunch of additional tests in the data in the paper. We want to make sure that, for example, the change that we observe in price is not driven by the presidential inauguration that occurred the day after the ban. And so in the manuscript, we have done more robustness, placebo checks that rule out these hypotheses. Okay, so in that sense, we can say we are confident that even if the data we focus on is a specific data set on a specific set of ads, we can draw conclusions that are broader for the market.
The study suggests small businesses may suffer disproportionately from the TikTok ban. Can you explain why smaller advertisers have fewer viable alternatives than larger ones?
Yeah, so this is a good point related to the previous question, right? The heterogeneity question across larger and smaller advertisers. So people argue, and that is probably true, that TikTok is a very valuable channel for smaller advertisers. So even just that, right? Even just shutting down that channel already um, impedes these small businesses to reach their target audiences. Okay. But on top of that, what we find is that these small businesses, right, they are also slower to adjust, right? We don't find that large substitution for them, right? And we believe that, smaller businesses might normally, what we see is they have tighter, smaller budgets, but they might also have less technical expertise, fewer capabilities, fewer resources, which are necessary to adapt their marketing strategy quickly, right? For example, if you think about the smaller advertisers on TikTok, they probably are very good at using that platform. They most probably they also they're very good at using organic posts to reach their audiences. So they know how to exploit the algorithm of TikTok very well. But then when is the moment of when is the moment of substituting to Meta? Meta is a completely different channel, right? It has different segments, different audiences, different formats, different dashboards. All these things they present switching costs to businesses, and these are probably often they're fixed costs. So you need enough scale in order to overcome these costs, right? So what we see is that these businesses don't adapt quickly, and probably that is due to these fixed switching costs that make them less flexible to adjust.
Professor, from a policy standpoint, how should regulators weigh the economic cost of banning a platform like TikTok against the national security or data privacy concerns often cited?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a very important question, but it's also a very complex one. Okay. So our paper doesn't say anything at all about preferences regarding the ban, the concerns, national security concerns, data concerns. We don't speak to that, but we show important thing that illuminates what can be the unintended consequences of a platform or a TikTok ban on the digital marketing ecosystem, right? So what we showed is that there is if you remove a player, you reduce competition, so you increase market concentration. You reduce options for companies, right? And the higher the prices go up, okay? And all of these things, they have a disproportionate, a higher burden. They present higher burden to smaller businesses, right? So we don't say anything about, the potential pros and cons of national security concerns, or, of the ban for addressing national security concerns. But what we say, there are potential consequences, right, which harm competition. Okay. And so policymakers, right, should incorporate this potential economic impact into their decision-making process, right? So we need to think holistically, right? Yeah, it's true. We think about security, but we also should think about effects on market concentration, innovation, equity, right? Heterogeneity effects, and consumers' welfare in the end, right? We don't speak directly to welfare in our paper, but the consequences can actually reach welfare in the end.
Dr. Donati, did you find any geographic or demographic trend in terms of where and how advertisers shifted spend after the outage?
Yeah, so given that the outage was happening for a day, basically, right? And then the service were restored, what we could do is also, let's take advantage, right? We said let's take advantage of the fact that the service is now restored and see what happens once the TikTok came back. Once TikTok came back, how do advertisers react? Okay. And so we find that advertisers, especially smaller advertisers, were very quickly reactive. So they went probably, right, they went back to TikTok, or at least what we see is that they stopped advertising and they reduced spend on Meta after the week after the ban. Okay, I'm sorry, the week after the outage. And we see that among smaller advertisers, those advertisers that normally target younger demographics, that younger audiences, for example, those between users between 18 to 34 years old, they were the quickest to reduce Meta spend. We also find that those advertisers that were only using Instagram ads, they were very quickly at reducing spend on that platform once TikTok services were restored. Okay. So these can tell us, something about the value of TikTok as an outside option, right? If TikTok is present, right, then those advertisers that try to target demographics that are particularly available on TikTok platforms, they would actually reduce spend on Meta and potentially, we don't see this, but potentially go back to TikTok. Okay, so we see that kind of substitution back to the original platform once TikTok went back online.
Would this type of cozy experimental analysis be applied to other platform disruptions? And what lessons does it offer for measuring market power in digital advertising?
So I think more broadly, rather than other disruptions, I think this approach can be used. So the disruption is clear, right? You have a platform that disappears from the market. We could study other outcomes potentially. Now, our study mainly look at the short-term effects, also because the ban was then delayed and therefore the platform came back online. But I think we can study, as you mentioned, market power, right? So our paper is very silent about that. We don't have any data that can speak about market power in this market. For example, meta market power, right? We don't observe the platform's choice regarding how many ad loads or sorry, how many ads to or ad slots to provide to advertisers, right? So this could be, for example, an interesting study, right? To look at whether, you know, the supply of ad slots changes, right? And so we can look at market power more directly there. And this can have direct consequences on users' welfare because, if there is let's say, ad loads increase, then users see more ads, and, users might actually dislike ads, right? And therefore, this harms this can decrease the welfare. But there are other things, right? We can think of innovation. So, for example, if there is a disruption, like a platform disappears from this market, what happens to innovation, right? And innovation can be, thought holistically and agnostically, but we can also think about specific applications, like what is the quality of the dashboard, right, that Meta provides to its users? What are all the measurement tools that are available to users? So if you have more competition in the market, is there incentive to provide more measurement tools to users, right? And measurement is key in digital advertising because we want to know, and advertisers want to know, what is the causal effect of their campaigns, right? What is the return on ad spend? And so this also is related to the idea of how do we measure attribution in the market, in the digital advertising market, right? Is Meta incentivized to provide data-driven attribution methods that can help advertisers, experimentally and causally estimate the effect of their ads? And more generally, right, you can think of, what are the incentives to provide data to advertisers, right? So data ownership, data portability, implications that, any implication that can change incentives of the platforms, especially of the dominant platforms, are, I think, studies that look at those are very interesting to consider in future research.
Professor Donati, my last question. Looking ahead, how should small businesses and digital marketers prepare for a potential long-term ban on TikTok? Are there strategies or platforms you see gaining relevance?
So yeah, this is also a very important a practical question, right? So I think that the short answer is diversification across channels. And this makes me think about my when I teach digital advertising here at Columbia. We end up, the last two classes are about multi-channel digital advertising plans, right? And this so a multi-channel plan should encompass a variety of channels, not only one platform or one format, but a variety of platforms and formats that try to engage consumers along the whole funnel, right? So from the very top part of the funnel where you try to engage with strangers, and so that's the acquisition part where you want to use display more broadly, to the bottom part of the funnel where you want to engage to consumers one-on-one, for example, with search advertising or with email and so on, right? So one-on-one relationship. So that is very important to consider for any business and specifically for small businesses. More lately, what we see in digital marketing, digital advertising is, a shift towards, extreme personalization, but also a shift towards these direct relationships. So one-on-one relationship between the company, the brand, and the consumers, right? And these has been made possible thanks to channels that open this one-on-one communication, right? Like emails, very personalized websites, communities, online communities, and think also whatever is dark social like WhatsApp, Messenger platforms that allows you to communicate directly to consumers. So this way of communication has been increasingly has become popular more recently, and it has a very it basically provides companies with a very let's say controllable uh, um, way of communication because it reduces dependency on third party platforms, right? So if you can own the data, if you can know the email, the phone number of your potential customers, and you can use that, and because they opt in for that, of course, then that reduces dependency on third-party providers like Meta and Google and allows the company to be more independent, right? Uh, so overall, right, diversification is key. Using these, first-party data platforms and channels is also key. And overall, being adaptable, right, and being data independent, we really, determine whether you can succeed uh, in the case, a platform like TikTok were banned from the market.
Thank you, Professor Dante Donati, for joining us today and sharing your fascinating research on the ripple effects of the TikTok outage and what it tells us about competition, platform dynamics, and the broader implications for digital advertising. Your work offers critical insights into how market concentration and platform bans can unintentionally shape outcomes for advertisers, particularly small businesses, highlighting the importance of evidence-based policy in the digital economy. We are grateful for your time and expertise, and we look forward to following your continued research on the intersection of technology, economics, and social impact. Thank you so much, Professor Donati.
Thank you for hosting me. Thank you for having me in. Goodbye.
Goodbye.